was established firmly in our constitutional history by the Supreme Court ruling in McCulloch versus Maryland, and the opinion was written by the distinguished Justice John Marshall. They ruled that Congress had the power to carry out or exercise powers not prohibited by the Constitution, not prohibited to Congress by the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, back in the early days of our history, argued during the ratification of the Constitution that the Necessary and Proper Clause granted too much power to the Congress. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, argued that this clause merely permitted Congress to execute powers already granted to it by the Constitution. In fact, Madison, who would later turn against the Necessary and Proper Clause, defended it back in those times during the ratification, saying whenever a general power to do a thing is given, every particular power for doing it is included. For example, the power to create the Federal Reserve Board is not expressly enumerated in the Constitution. But the Chief Justice, that is John Marshall, argued that such powers were allowed in order for Congress to fulfill the their express powers of taxing and spending. Let me refer to the Ninth Amendment, because I think we might lose sight of that in this discussion. The Ninth Amendment was included in the Constitution to avoid a situation where the argument could be made that since some rights Congress was not free to violate, such as the Bill of Rights, then government might be free to violate any rights not specifically protected by the Constitution. The Ninth Amendment was specifically designed to address this. Most justices believe today, and have believed over time, that the Ninth Amendment has binding authority, and they use it to protect implicit rights hinted at, but not enumerated elsewhere in the Constitution. Implicit rights such as the right to privacy, it's not in the Constitution, the right to travel, that's not in the Constitution, and the right to the presumption of innocence, which is not in the Constitution. So let's be careful what we're talking about here now. The 10th Amendment and the states' rights movement has to be put into historical context. I am sorry to bring it up, folks, but it has murky history. Do you really want to be associated with arguments such as states' rights that have been used historically to say that it's okay to have slavery, to say that it's okay to suppress the freedom of speech of those who are opposed to slavery or its expansion? This 10th Amendment was used for that purpose. It was also used to defend the right to violate the sovereignty of non-slave states by sending slave catchers into their territory to enforce the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It's been used to deem portions of their populations as inferior and altogether unfit to associate with the white race. States' rights happen to be used historically as code words. And I could take you back to the civil rights movement of this country. When George Wallace said, segregation now, segregation forever. And he said, oh, what I should have said was, not segregation, but states' rights now, states' rights tomorrow, and states' rights forever. Because for him and for many at that time, they were the same thing. You can go back to John C. Calhoun, 1832, when he used states' rights to defend slavery. Jackson said in answer to Calhoun that the doctrine of states' rights is incompatible with the existence of the Union. I'll be back, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Avery. Those still wishing to speak, Senators Carpenter, Council, Mello, Haar, Christensen, and others.